The sunset blazed across the prairie, red as a blood-soaked slash tearing through the sky. Jed Colton, a wiry old rancher with a crooked back bent from years of solitude, quietly nudged his bony horse toward the rotting wooden gate. The trail was so silent, the creak of the saddle sounded like the earth itself was letting out a mournful sigh. Then he stopped dead. Right there at the gate, swaying under the dying light, hung the massive body of a woman. The rope was cinched tight around her neck. Her weight pulled her shoulders twice the width of his down with every gust of wind. Her rough, calloused hands hung limp, fingers still stained with dried blood. The sight hit Jed like a bullet to the chest. His heart pounded so hard, he thought it might burst. Carved deep into the wooden post were words slashed by a knife. "This is what happens to those who defy Cain's law." Jed shivered. Mayor Cain, the tyrant who ruled this land with fear and violence, had turned Jed's front gate into a gallows. It was not just a killing. It was a message. A public humiliation. Jed started to turn his horse around when the last ray of sunset brushed across the woman's pale face. Her eyelids twitched. A strangled breath slipped from her throat. She was alive. Without thinking, Jed jumped from the saddle and pulled his knife. One clean slash. The rope snapped. Her heavy body collapsed into his frail arms, as if the whole weight of the night had fallen into his chest. When her eyes finally opened, Jed felt a chill run through him. It was not the look of a helpless victim. It was the cold, steady gaze of someone who had stared death in the face and come back to tell the tale. And now, a word from the storyteller. I truly thank you for letting me share this moment with you tonight. Let us know where you are listening from. My deepest wish is that peace and happiness follow you wherever you are hearing this story. Jed Colton laid the heavy body down on the cracked, bone-dry ground. The giant woman's chest rose and fell in broken, ragged breaths persistent, like the distant beat of a war drum. His hand trembled as he gripped the knife tighter, wary, uncertain. Who was she? And why had Cain chosen to hang her right at his gate? Jed did not have time to figure it out. He dragged her inside and placed her on the old bed. The small room was dark, lit only by the flickering firelight from the stove. The dancing flames played across her muscular frame, making Jed feel even more uneasy. This was no ordinary woman. Her hands were tough as a blacksmith's, arms thick like tree trunks, and her chest heaved beneath a torn and tattered shirt. He sat down against the wall, his eyes fixed on the rope mark still etched deep into her neck. It had been a long time since a living soul had shared this house normally filled only with wind and the creak of old wood. But her presence did not bring comfort. He, a frail rancher, was now harboring a woman who looked like she could crush his bones with a single grip. Word spread faster than wildfire on the prairie. By morning, when Jed opened the door, a few figures were already lurking near the fence line. Some women whispered among themselves, while a few men stood with arms crossed, half curious, half scornful. Heard he brought that hanged monster into his house, a woman big as a cow, still alive after the noose. That's gotta be a bad omen. Jed Colton was always weak. Now he's sheltering the devil herself. The whispers cut like blades. Jed kept his head down and walked inside, pretending not to hear, but the shame simmered inside him. He had always been looked down on, too skinny to haul timber, too quiet for the saloon, too soft to carry a gun. Now, saving a giant monster had made him a bigger joke than ever. Still, over all the gossip and murmurs, Jed could not shake the memory of her eyes from the night before. They had not shone with fear, but with a fire. The kind of fire only seen in those who had stared death in the face and walked away. And in that moment, Jed had seen something in her gaze that he had long lost an unbreakable will to survive. He did not know if he had welcomed trouble or saved a guardian angel. But one thing was certain: ever since he cut that rope, the quiet, empty days of his life were gone for good. That night, wind came howling through the cracks in the old wooden boards, long and low like the prairie itself was breathing in the dark. Jed sat at the table, an old revolver beside him, eyes locked on the bed. The giant woman had not moved, but her breathing had settled into a steady rhythm. The fire in the stove cast a golden glow on her angular face, scarred and silent. Then suddenly, she sat up. The old bed groaned loud beneath her weight, wood creaking like thunder. Jed flinched, hand already on the grip of his gun, but before he could draw it, her eyes locked onto his sharp, alert, and cold. Not the eyes of someone who had barely escaped death. "Why did you save me?" Her voice was hoarse but steady. Jed choked on his answer. He had not expected the question. He had acted on instinct like a thirsty man stumbling on water. I could not just leave someone dying at my gate. The woman let out a dry laugh, like stone scraping against stone. Her broad hand rose to her neck, fingers brushing the deep purple bruises still etched into her skin. Cain wanted me dead, and he wanted this whole damn town to watch. You think you can hide me from him? The name sent a chill through Jed. Cain the mayor. The man who wore a white hat in church, but whose hands were soaked in the blood of the town. Jed bit his lip, silent. But the fear in his eyes betrayed him. The woman tilted her head slightly, studying him. I know what Cain is trying to bury. He killed the Apache up north in the valley, then sold guns to bounty hunters. I saw it with my own eyes. That's why he hanged me at your gate, so he could silence me and send a message to you and every other weak man in this place. Jed's throat tightened. He had heard whispers about Cain, ugly rumors and ghost stories, but this was the first time someone who had lived through it had spoken the truth out loud. The woman leaned back slightly. Her tangled hair spilled over her shoulder like a curtain of shadow. My name is Mara. The name hit the room like a blade carving into old wood. Simple, but sharp. Rough around the edges. Jed sat in silence. The house suddenly felt too small for this woman's presence. Inside him, a storm began to stir, a mixture of fear and something else. Something like fire. A spark he had not felt in years. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the little room trembled with thick, uneasy silence. Jed realized, from the moment he cut that noose, he had not just saved a life. He had invited a storm into his crumbling home. Early the next morning, the prairie lay beneath a blanket of cold gray mist. Jed was just stoking the fire when a loud, frantic knock echoed at the door. He opened it to find several neighbors standing there, eyes shifty with fear. Jed, you really got that woman in your house? One man growled, glancing around nervously. Cain won't let this slide. You're dragging all of us into trouble. The whispering from last night had now turned into open tension. Jed said nothing, one hand covering the doorframe, blocking their view of Mara sitting at the table, her broad back nearly filling the glow from the fireplace behind her. Before anyone could argue further, a deep roar thundered from the northern woods. It rolled through the boards of the house, shaking the very frame, turning the neighbors' faces pale. Grizzly bear, an old woman whispered, her hands crossing over her chest in prayer. The chickens in the yard scattered in panic. The horses in the stable shrieked, kicking violently at the walls. Jed rushed to the porch, his heartbeat racing. Out of the mist, a monstrous grizzly bear emerged. Its thick, ash-gray fur was soaked with dew. Hunched shoulders rose nearly to the top of the stable's roof. It strode straight into the garden, tearing through the fence like it was straw. Each step kicked up dust. Its claws raked deep into the hard earth. Sweet Lord, it's come back to the village, a man muttered, then turned and ran. The others followed, fleeing in all directions. No one stayed. Only Jed stood frozen, his hands gripping the porch rail tight. He knew full well that the old revolver inside would not bring down this beast. Shooting it would only enrage it. The bear smashed into the chicken coop, swiping boards into splinters. The shrill screeches of the birds echoed like screams. It let out a roar that thundered through the valley, setting the dogs howling from far away. Then Mara stepped into the doorway. The silhouette of the giant woman filled the frame of the porch. She watched the chaos without blinking. A bear, she said, voice low and raspy but calm, unnervingly calm. Jed spun around. You stay inside. That thing'll tear you apart. Mara gave a faint smirk, her eyes steely and cold. Cain wanted me dead. Looks like the heavens had something more dramatic in mind. And with that, she strode out into the yard, tall, fierce, and unyielding, as wild as the beast growling just a few steps away. Jed's knees felt weak. All he could do was stand there, watching this woman who had been hanged just yesterday now walk straight toward the grizzly bear, the very monster that had haunted the town for countless winters. A gust of wind tore through the prairie, carrying the scent of scorched grass and blood. Time seemed to freeze, the world holding its breath for the impossible showdown ahead. And now, a word from the storyteller. I truly appreciate your being here. If this story brings back memories of the old days, dusty afternoons, the sound of hooves echoing in your heart, consider subscribing to my channel, so each day we can sit down again. And I will share with you another tale from the Wild West. The grizzly rose up on its hind legs, towering over the yard, its massive shadow swallowing the ground below. It let out a thunderous roar that tore through the morning fog, sending the horses into a frenzy inside the stable. Mara did not flinch. She marched forward, bare feet pressing into the cracked, dry earth with each firm, deliberate step. Her broad shoulders stood tall, matching the beast's hulking presence blow for blow. Jed broke out in a cold sweat. His trembling hand rested on the grip of his revolver, but he knew all too well that a shot from his old Colt would be like throwing a pebble at a storm. He could only stare, wide-eyed, as if trapped in a fever dream. A woman who had barely escaped the noose was now walking straight into battle with a grizzly bear barehanded. The bear bellowed, clouds of hot mist billowing from its jaws. It swung a massive paw, shattering a wooden post into splinters, sending dirt and rocks flying. Mara stopped, just a few paces from the beast. Her eyes locked onto its face, unshaken. "Come on, big boy," she muttered, her voice low and gravelly, yet clear as a war drum. The bear hesitated just a heartbeat. The voice had no panic, no rage, just calm. Mara slowly bent down, picked up a half-burned torch from the ground, and held it high. The fire flared, casting light into her cold steel eyes. The bear roared again and charged. The ground shook. Dust filled the air. Jed screamed from the porch, "Run!" But Mara did not move. She turned her body and hurled the burning torch straight at the bear's face. Flames burst in front of it, stunning the beast just long enough for her to strike. She lunged forward, a living oak in motion, no scream, no war cry, just raw, silent strength. Her powerful arms slammed into the bear's shoulder, using her entire body to drive it back. The impact echoed like thunder. The bear staggered, shoved toward the broken fence. It roared, clawed wildly, but step by step, Mara drove it backward. The yard fell silent, only the bear's growls and the rasp of Mara's breath filled the air. From a distance, townsfolk had gathered, mouths agape, eyes wide in disbelief. At last, the grizzly crossed the broken fence, turned, and fled into the woods, leaving behind deep, monstrous tracks in the soil. Mara stood there, chest rising and falling, her arms streaked with blood from where the claws had grazed her. She turned, her eyes blazing not with triumph, but with the cool indifference of someone who had done nothing more than finish their morning chore. Jed stood frozen. His heart pounded like a war drum. In his eyes, the woman before him was no longer the hanged monster. She was a living force of nature, something no one could define, and nothing could stop. Rumors spread faster than wind. By the end of the day, everyone in town was talking about what they had seen with their own eyes. A giant woman, hanged just the day before, now standing face to face with a grizzly bear and forcing it to flee. In the market, folks whispered, "I saw it myself. She was as big as the bear and made it run. Mean as hell. Not one of us men even dared to fire a shot. Jed Colton's so weak. Now he's hiding behind a monster in a dress." Every word felt like a dull blade slowly twisting in Jed's ears. He had never been respected, too skinny to work the land, too quiet to join the saloon crowd. Now, whatever shred of pride he had left was torn to pieces. They laughed, saying he was hiding behind a woman's skirt. By sundown, Jed sat on the porch, an old whiskey bottle half empty by his side. Eyes fixed on the fence he had hastily patched after the bear's rampage. He had not gone to the market all day, could not look anyone in the eye. A strange kind of shame was boiling inside him, the shame of a man deemed worthless by the world around him. Inside, Mara stepped out quietly. The fading sunlight wrapped around her towering frame, her scarred muscles still streaked with scratches. She looked at Jed for a long moment, then sat down beside him. The porch creaked under her weight. "I heard what they said," she murmured, voice low and rough. Jed did not turn. He let out a bitter smile. "They're not wrong. I'm nothing. Just a small man. And you took on a grizzly." Mara's hand moved to the rope mark still visible on her neck. Her gaze drifted far beyond the horizon. "You think this strength is a gift?" she said, voice steady but raw. "My whole life, men looked at me like a threat. Women like a freak. They did not hang me because I broke the law. They hanged me so the town could laugh at this body and forget the truth I carry." Her voice caught, but did not falter. Jed turned toward her for the first time. Seeing beneath the unshakable shell was a loneliness so bare it ached. "I thought I was the only one folks looked down on," Jed said softly, his hand tightening on the armrest. "Turns out, you know that feeling too." A hush fell over them, broken only by the wind whistling through the broken fence, and in that silence, a quiet truth settled between them, both cast aside by the world, but together, That rejection had become something else. Something strong. Mara looked up. Her eyes gleamed. Cain fears the truth I carry. The townsfolk fear the body I wear. But you, Jed, you were the only one who cut that rope. So stop calling yourself weak. Jed looked at her, and in that moment, deep in his chest, he felt something stir, something he had not felt in years. A flame, just beginning to burn again. That evening, dark clouds rolled in thick and heavy. Wind whipped dust across the dirt road leading to Jed Colton's ranch. From the distance came the pounding of hooves and the shouts of angry men. Jed stood on the porch, heart hammering. In front of him, Cain rode a massive black horse, flanked by more than 24 hired guns, rough men with cold eyes and pistols swaying at their hips. Behind them, townsfolk gathered in hushed curiosity and fear, peeking out from behind rotting fences. Cain reined in at the gate, his voice sharp and cold like a death sentence. "Colton, hand over the woman you're hiding. If not, this gate'll be your gallows by sundown." Jed swallowed hard. Sweat soaked the back of his shirt. For a moment, he nearly collapsed from fear. Then Mara stepped out beside him. The giant woman stood tall and unyielding, the noose bruises still visible around her neck. Her eyes were like sharpened steel. In her hand, the very rope they once used to hang her. She placed it into Jed's hand and whispered, "You cut it once. Now we live together, or die together." In that moment, something broke loose inside Jed. He turned and stared straight at Cain, voice hoarse, but firm. "She's not going anywhere. If you want blood, Cain, then step over my dead body." A murmur rose from the crowd. Cain narrowed his eyes, then gave a sharp nod. Gunfire erupted loud and sudden. Smoke exploded into the air. Hooves thundered over the dirt. Jed dove from the porch, his Colt roaring to life. The first bullet struck a hired gun in the shoulder, dropping him like a sack of grain. Jed's hands shook, but his finger no longer hesitated on the trigger. Mara charged forward like a storm. One mighty swing of her arm sent a man flying like a broken scarecrow. Another reached for his pistol, but before he could aim, she grabbed him by the neck and slammed him into the ground with a crash. It looked less like a fight, and more like a battle between beasts. Only this time, the beast was the woman they had hanged just yesterday. The hired guns kept shooting wildly, filling the yard with dust and smoke. Amid the chaos, screams, hoofbeats, and gunshots, Jed and Mara stood back to back. He fired. She struck. The same men who once mocked them now lay groaning in the dirt. At last, Cain was thrown from his horse. He scrambled in the dust, his face twisted in panic. His eyes widened in horror as Mara approached, bloodied hands tightening around the same rope they had once used to kill her. The remaining gunmen backed away. The yard fell silent, save for the heavy breathing of survivors and the fading sting of gunpowder in the air. Cain trembled, no longer the righteous mayor in a white hat at the pulpit, but a broken coward, finally dragged into the light. Jed stood beside Mara, and for the first time in his life, felt his shoulders square with true strength. The smoke of gunpowder slowly cleared. A horse lay lifeless across the path. The hired guns groaned, limped, or fled into the dust. At the crumbling gate of Jed Colton's ranch, only Cain remained on his knees, face caked with dirt, eyes filled with rage and fear. Mara stood tall, clutching the noose they once used to hang her. For a moment, it looked like she might wrap it around Cain's neck and return the favor, but instead, she dropped the rope at his feet. Her voice, low and raspy, rang out like a bell. "This rope once killed me. Today, it reveals the coward you really are." Jed stepped forward, still shaking from the recoil of his revolver, but his eyes burned with fire. He pointed at Cain and raised his voice for all the villagers hiding behind the fences to hear. "This is the man who hanged an innocent woman at my gate for show. This is the man who's fed off our fear and blood." Whispers spread through the crowd, then grew louder. For the first time, the townsfolk did not bow their heads before Cain. They murmured, then nodded, together. Years of fear cracked like dry wood. Cain was dragged away, stripped of every ounce of power. In the days that followed, something shifted in the town. People started visiting Jed Colton's ranch not to mock, but to lend a hand. They helped rebuild the fence, asked him for planting advice. And when they stepped through the gate, their eyes always landed on the giant woman. No one called her a monster anymore. Mara stayed. She and Jed replanted the garden, rebuilt the barn, dressed each other's wounds, both physical and otherwise. Under her massive hands, the wood rose solid as stone. Under Jed's quiet patience, the land slowly turned green again. One afternoon, as the sun poured gold over the fields, Jed hung the old noose on the wall of the porch. Mara looked at it, eyes distant. Jed spoke softly, not to remember the fear, but to remind us sometimes. What they use to shame us becomes the proof we survived. Mara placed her broad hand on his shoulder, and in her eyes, for the first time, there was more than just steel, there was warmth. A rare warmth both of them had spent their whole lives searching for. The prairie wind whistled through the freshly built fence, carrying the scent of new grass and the faint echo of hoofbeats. That little ranch was no longer a place of death, but a place where two outcasts had found each other and stood tall against beasts, bullets, and human cruelty. Because real strength is not in muscle or gunpowder. It lives in two souls, rejected by the world, who choose to stand together. And now, a word from the storyteller. Brothers and sisters, out here in the West, we used to think strength came from muscles, from a gun in your hand, or a name folks feared in the saloon. But I learned something else. Real strength? It comes from standing beside someone when the whole damn world turns its back on them. That woman who was hanged, and that skinny rancher with nothing but a dull knife, they found each other. And from that moment on, no one could call them weak again. Sometimes in life, what we need is not someone to take the storm for us, but someone who will stand right next to us in the rain and walk through the darkness together. So if you've ever felt small in this world, remember this. Maybe that small piece of you is the one thing that makes someone else strong enough to survive. Once again, I am truly honored to share this story with you tonight. Tell me what you thought in the comments down below. Hit the number 1 if this story moved you. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can ride together again in the next tale from the Wild West.